I'm Bill Hamblett, Editor-in-Chief of Proceedings at the Naval Institute. Welcome to the West panel discussion this afternoon. The topic is, can the Navy and Marine Corps operationalize artificial intelligence? A great topic, certainly on the minds of fleet operators right now. If you haven't had a chance to read the February issue of Proceedings, there's copies all over the floor. I draw your attention to the winner of the Information Warfare Essay Contest this year. It's an article by Commander Edgar Jatho and Joshua Kroll, and it's titled Artificial Intelligence, Too Fragile to Fight, ? So the topic is definitely on the minds of folks out in the fleet and the Fleet Marine Force. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce the moderator of the panel, Captain George Galdarisi. He is a career naval aviator, award-winning writer, best-selling author. He started his career writing with his first Proceedings article in 1978. During his career as a naval aviator, George completed operational assignments in all 5 fleets. He commanded HSL 41, HSL 43. He commanded the USS Cleveland, LPD 7, and Amphibious Squadron 7. He is now the Director of Strategic Assessments and Technical Futures at Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. So please welcome George and the panel this afternoon. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
So Bill, thanks for that far too kind introduction. It kind of reminds me of when my first squadron skipper gave me my fitness report and he said, here's something only your mother would believe. But thank you all for joining our panel. It's an important topic, and we're glad to be able to communicate our thoughts with you all. Our lab at Naval Information Warfare Center, where Dr. Katie Rainey and I work, has a huge stake in artificial intelligence and machine learning and big data. So this is something that comes pretty naturally to us. Before I go any further, I just wanted to thank the Naval Institute and AFCEA for giving us this opportunity to share our views on this topic. So what do we intend to talk about? I think most people agree that big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning represent some of the most cutting-edge technology today and will be even more cutting-edge and important in the future. Generally branded under just artificial intelligence or AI, most people who have thoughtful things to say on the subject agree that AI will change our lives more than anything since electricity was invented in 1879. But AI is the ultimate dual-use technology, and its impact on the military sphere is already being felt. Here is how the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, co-chaired by former Deputy Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the U.S. Naval Institute, the Honorable Robert Work, and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, said in their final report, quote, "We can still defend America and our allies without widespread AI adoption today, but in the future we will almost certainly lose without it." Pretty strong words. And most policy and security experts agree with this assessment. So to discuss this issue of how we operationalize AI, we've assembled the panel of experts you see here. We have Colonel Randy Pugh, who's the Naval Postgraduate School, and will speak on the operational goodness of inserting AI into our military platform systems, sensors, and weapons. Next up will be Dr. Katie Rainey of the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, who'll share her thoughts on how we write the algorithms to support the vision that Colonel Pugh has for AI, and why we can't just adapt the algorithms that big tech has already written. And finally, Dr. Sam Tangretti of the Naval War College will address the policy, doctrinal, and strategic implications if we do insert AI into our military systems and what that means for the future of warfare. So we have a ConOps. Each of our speakers will spend just a few minutes explaining who they are and what they do in the field of AI. Then I'll ask the panelists a few questions, let them ask each other some questions, and then, of course, open it up to you all for your questions to the panel. So with that as a flight plan, Colonel Randy Pugh is a career intelligence officer who served in combat in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Philippines. He's Deputy Director of the Captain Wayne Hughes Naval Warfare Studies Institute at the Naval Postgraduate School. But perhaps most importantly for this panel, he runs the Naval Postgraduate School AI Machine Learning Community of Interest, which brings together a host of practitioners in this area. So for those of you who don't know Colonel Pugh personally, a fun fact about him is that he was born in Annapolis, Maryland, and when he went to the Naval Academy from his very austere room in Bancroft Hall, he could see his home, which had air conditioning and heat and all the amenities. So a tough road to hoe. So without further ado, please welcome Colonel Pugh.
Great. Thanks, sir. The most importantly is it was my parents were close to main office, so they could bring me care packages every day. So it was terrible. I think to set the stage, it's not a hard sell on this audience to talk about the benefits of artificial intelligence and the potential revolutionary results that it could have for warfighting. Just a little bit about me. I started my career as a signals intelligence officer, and I was on a Don CIO panel yesterday. And so from being a second lieutenant, from birth kind of thing, understanding the importance of data. So National Security Agency collecting every electron ever emitted, on the planet Earth, and never throwing anything away. So they could go back 20 years ago and tell you where radar was emitting kind of thing. And then realizing that over time, when you put all of these individual sensor reports together, it starts to reveal things by correlation or by trends in time and space kind of thing. And so that whole culture of appreciating data and appreciating the insights that can be drawn from data, either in the immediate or in the small or over time. And so when the Navy and Marine Corps, when we start looking at the benefits of artificial intelligence, I think everything from weapons systems would traditionally have benefited from machine learning, so launch a system and then the system will make decisions on its own based on what it's sensing. I think that's all the way at the high end and the most kinetic end. And then as you back off from that, if people aren't familiar with something called activity-based intelligence, but that's the idea of everything happens at a place and a time on the planet, and by taking all those sensor reports, you can make sense over time. And then all the way down to things like our personnel system and talent management. So we had a meeting earlier with Lieutenant General Glavy, who has one of the hardest jobs in the Marine Corps, which is all of this war fighting in the ether. Skill sets from cyber warfare to electronic warfare to signals intelligence, space, and how do you find young men and women to bring into the service that have the aptitude to do that, and then most importantly, how do you keep them engaged, continue their education as they go through their careers, and then retain them. And so the ability to take our antiquated personnel systems, many in siloed storage, tightly coupled applications that store all that information, and then extract all of that, normalize it, and be able to make sense of that, all that data across all these different places. I think you can start to see, if only we knew what we know, that we would be able to really draw some incredible insights and be much more effective and much more efficient. So George mentioned the AI ML COW, or Coalition of the Willing. It is a non-denominational, all members are welcome roundtable, and I think, not to step onto Dr. Rainey's portion of this, but just how do we get to the advantages that we think we can have in AI? And I think it comes through changing the culture, and the way we do that is through the democratization of AI within the Navy and Marine Corps. So the Coalition of the Willing, I think, is a first step, brings together academia and industry, people out in the fleet and fleet marine force, people at warfare centers and warfighting development centers and labs, and then the average citizen or whatever, that everybody comes at it with a different perspective, looks at the problem through a different lens. And the ability to do education, exposure, and shared experience starts to lead us to some of the solutions that we need. And then I would just end before I hand it off to Dr. Rainey, and that is, as we think about how we're going to improve our weapons systems, how we're going to improve our business processes, how we're going to improve our warfighting capability, I think one thing that we should keep constantly in mind is that we have to think about capabilities and concepts simultaneously, and the interplay between concepts and capability. Because this is not, AI will not be evolutionary, I think, for the Navy and Marine Corps, but will be revolutionary, and it will require us to rethink a lot of things that we probably have not seriously considered since maybe World War II, and in how we do naval warfighting, both independently, Navy and Marine Corps, and certainly together as an integrated naval force. So with that,
Okay.
Dr. Rainey?
Thank you, Colonel Pugh.
I'm sorry, George?
No, you're good. You're good. So next up is Dr. Katie Rainey, who's a research scientist at NIWC Pacific and is active in building a community of AI researchers among a wide array of defense laboratories. And most importantly for this panel, she's the founding co-chair of our annual workshop on the naval applications of machine learning, which brings together technical experts from a wide array of organizations, both military, industry, academia, and others. A fun fact about Dr. Rainey is that even with all her responsibilities at NIWC PAC, leading scientists and engineers, she still finds time to have a more refreshing leadership experience, and as a Girl Scout leader with a troop of 7 daisies and brownies, grades K to 2, we won't ask her which one's more challenging, the scientists, the engineers, or the daisies and brownies. But with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Katie Rainey.
Thank you. So I work at Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific with George, and as you probably are aware, we're a research laboratory supporting all manner of work from basic and applied research on up. And I began my career as doing some small research efforts, looking at how we could detect ships in satellite imagery. And so that's especially back around 2011, 2012. That was right in the heat of deep learning becoming a big thing and using that for image processing. And so we're taking the cutting edge algorithms and applying them to this very classic Navy problem, and discovering that it was actually incredibly hard and was not working out the way that all the academic papers seemed to be implying that it should. And so my job sort of became to say, no, we're not going to be able to get you an algorithm that is 99% accurate at the end of the fiscal year. Sorry. Or if you want that, then we're going to need lots more data, and we're going to need to spend a lot of time and money making that data clean, and doing all sorts of kind of not sexy things that people don't want to have to put on the PowerPoint slide that they're paying for. But that's kind of the fact of the matter, that we, in order to use this dual-use technology, as George described it, we have to have the capabilities in collecting data and cleaning data and preparing it, and having that infrastructure that is the same that commercial entities have. And that's the really big challenge that I think faces the DoD, is kind of getting their ducks in a row with respect to preparing to use the promises of AI. So I maybe tend to ignore those problems. That sounds like a problem for someone else to solve. I'll just tell them that they have to. But back on maybe on the algorithm side, we do have a lot of really talented researchers at NIWC Pacific and at all the other Navy and DoD labs that are trying to look at how you apply AI to our DoD problems. And we live as kind of a conduit between the more basic research folks in universities and the warfighter, as well as our partners in industry who are actually operationalizing things. And so seeing that and seeing all the people kind of in our world that were working on different pieces of AI that really I thought could be working together better. That's why we started the workshop on naval applications of machine learning, or NAML. And we've been running that for I think we're on our 6th year. And starting last year when we had to go virtual, we were really honored to be able to partner with FCA. And so it's now officially an FCA event. And because we were virtual, we were able to expand our reach to over 1,400 registrants last year. And our next event is coming up in March 22nd to the 24th. Again, virtual. And if you see me after, I can give you the link where you can find that information about registering. And what's really great about that is that we have, again, sort of all manners of folks from grad students who are working on DARPA contracts, all the way up to companies that are showing off their products. And we can identify, all these people are like working to identify the specific challenges that need to be met in order to operationalize AI for the Navy. And by talking about them in this kind of environment, even if it's kind of an open environment, you can still talk about the many sorts of challenges that are specific to our use cases that aren't being addressed in sort of the outside research community. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you, Dr. Rainey. Finally, batting cleanup is my friend, Dr. Sam Tangretti. Professor Tangretti is the director of the Institute for Future Warfare Studies at the Naval War College, where he's organized seminars and workshops addressing the impact of AI on the future of warfare. And perhaps most importantly for this panel, Sam is the lead editor of the Naval Institute book, AI at War, and organized the contributions over 24 experts in the field to produce the book that was recently added to the Chief of Naval Operations reading list. Fun fact about Dr. Tangretti involves highs and lows. He was once included as a character in a novel, but the author killed him off halfway through the book. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sam Tangretti.
Thank you, George. What George didn't say is that George was the co-editor, and then Kate was one of the authors of one of the chapters, so we all have worked together well. Now, I'm going to begin my remarks by identifying myself as I am not a technologist. I am a strategist who looks at technology, emerging technologies, and whether they can be operationalized. So when I look at emerging technologies, the first thing I ask is not necessarily about the technology itself. What I ask is, how will this technology deter or defeat the People's Liberation Army? That's what I ask. And so when you talk about operationalizing AI, that's the sort of focus that I have and how I evaluate it. Now, the things that really has impacted me, or the things that, the one thing, and this is, I'm going to deviate and give advice directly to you all who are working AI or working an AI firm. What you want to do, if you want to take center stage and do what is not being done, is you have to figure out how AI is going to handle deception, how the algorithms are going to be able to determine when information is, the big data is false or true, how to build a machine that knows when not to trust itself. That will be the key, because as the famous Chinese sage Sun Tzu said, all war is deception. And my fear or my concern when I've studied the big firms at Silicon Valley and others is that their business model doesn't necessarily take deception into consideration. Therefore, when they build the algorithm, they are building it in a way that deception is far removed from the way the big data is being managed. And I have concern when you try to operationalize AI into the military, and I'm not talking necessarily helping the personnel system and that, I'm talking as decision aids for operational commanders. That is one of the hurdles that we really need to really focus on, is how do you handle deceptive data. And my concern is because if you look at the business model of Google, and there's some Google people around, and I'm not picking out Google, but when Google siphons off the data about you from the internet and uses it with their algorithm for their marketing purposes, there's no assumption that the data on you is false, that you didn't deliberately plant that data. You know, I use an example in one of the articles I wrote on this topic where I say, you know, if you clicked on products that you never intended to use, you know, say tennis, for example, if you're not a tennis player, you click on those products, you maybe you even buy one from Amazon and then mail it back. And then you look at all the tennis sites and stuff, that algorithm's going to build you as a tennis player, even if you never stepped on the court. And how do you determine in a military situation when the data is going to be false? That is something that if you're in an AI firm, you guys, if you want to get ahead of the pack, take a look at that and conceptualize about that. So that's definitely a concern. Another example is using AI in managing supply chains. Supply chain example. If you are a final assembler dependent on parts from a supply chain, you don't assume that someone in a supply chain is going to make you a false part. But in war, that's the sort of thing that the enemy is trying to do. Now, when I talk to the Silicon Valley folks, and this is an AI firm CEO that I talk with, and I try to talk about this deception problem when you're applying to war, this is a quote that he said. He says, "If it is false, it is because we mislabeled it." And I try to explain, the enemy, you might label it, but the enemy is going to try to relabel it. And you need to figure out how your system is going to handle that, whether your system can handle that. And recently, IARPA, which is the intelligence agency's equivalent to DARPA, has started to look at this. But for AI firms and stuff, if you want to do business with the military and get ahead of that is one topic that you ought to think about. Now, going back to does the system deter or defeat the People's Liberation Army as an example? We at the Naval War College have a proud tradition of focusing on that sort of thing because if you might recall from history that Naval War College started building and gaming the campaign against Imperial Japan in the 1920s. Not because they wanted a war with Imperial Japan, but that was foreordained or we desired it, but because that was the worst scenario that could happen, and they had a plan for it. So they from the 20s and stuff. So when the actual war happened, as Admiral Nimitz said, we thought of everything except the kamikaze. So we knew how to fight that war. So looking at what is the worst contingency we could face, that's why I'm talking about, does this deter or defeat the People's Liberation Army? Now, AI is dependent on data. And when I talk about AI at operational use, there's a lot of assumptions. All the data are coming from sensors, the various sensors built. And we could talk mosaic, we could talk various sensors. And the number one is to figure out if the sensor is getting accurate data. Number two is whether we're ever going to get the data from the sensor. And that brings me to a second thing that I think AI firms should be thinking about, and I'm going through a circuitous route. Many of our systems, take the famous systems like Predator, are systems that have humans in the loop or humans in control. But all that requires long-haul communications. Many of the sensors out there require long-haul communications. When I start talking about, people say to me, Sam, no worry, satellites, there are some companies that could narrow the beam and all that, and that we'll have the comms. And there are some people who will say, well, some sort of unknown intelligence agency, is going to be using that satellites, and maybe the Navy isn't going to have access to it. I don't know. Apropos of the Naval War College, and I'm not trying to sell a book, but one of the other books I did is on anti-access warfare. There's a Naval Institute folk there who wanted me to point it out. But what I do in the book is, I'd give you all a copy for free if I could, but what I do in the book is look at what the campaign might be. And the first thing that if the people, if a war would occur with the People's Republic of China, the first thing they're going to go is after is our satellites, our long-haul communications. So what the AI aspect of it is, we need to design AI for our systems that are unmanned to know when they have to go in autonomous mode because they can no longer be controlled by humans because we can't get the signals to them. That's another aspect. We want to keep people in the loop. But we also have to think about, if we're going to operationalize AI, we have to think of how systems that we can no longer talk with will decide what to do. And we have to build some algorithms and focus AI on that. And that's an area that people don't want to talk about because we want to talk about AI ethics and we want to keep humans in the loop. But my concern is in a campaign, a terrible campaign, that if it happens, many of the systems that we rely on, long range, based on long haul communications, we will not be able to control them. So they're going to have to control themselves, or they're going to sink or do something else. So these are two areas of AI that if you're in an AI firm, I think you start thinking about if you want to do business with DoD. That's what I think DoD needs, that the big firms, maybe they're working on it, I don't know, but kind of in their philosophy, they haven't quite gotten to the point of wrestling with this problem. And we saw that in the book that we did, which was a 2-year study on various aspects of AI. One firm was asked, can you operationalize this? And it was very difficult for them to handle war because it doesn't have a fixed rule set. Yeah, there's laws of war that are legal aspects, but there's no fixed rule set. So you're constantly having to deal with a situation that that the algorithm is not tweaked to. And also, the other thing about this, to tell the firms is, try to avoid the hype. The hype is going to kill you. I mean, the Elon Musk 10,000 robo-taxis on the streets by 2019. I mean, that's going to hurt practical applications of AI because the public is going to be disappointed in the simple results. And that's something else that I worry about.
Sam, thank you. So,
Okay.
So we wanted to open up the questions from you all, but I just wanted to break the ice with the initial question for the panel. So a lot of the industry partners that have booths here have deep roots in AI and machine learning, can help DoD a lot. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists if you had one request of industry to bring something to the DoD that would accelerate having big data, AI, and machine learning get into our military weapon systems faster, what would you ask industry to bring to the table? Colonel Pugh?
Yeah, thanks for ruining my answer by the last thing that you added. And I guess my advice would be start small and scale fast. So right now there's we talk about the AI winters where you have overpromise and underdeliver, which we've done twice. And so starting with something like our business processes or our personnel system, LinkedIn is uncanny to me that it knows all the people that I should invite to be friends. And so taking those kinds of things that have been proven in the commercial world and then dual using them over to the military, whether it's for talent management or something else, something that is low risk, so don't start with the one that has huge ethical implications or safety concerns, but build trust in AI from the user's perspective, and build trust in AI from the senior leader's perspective that we can do these things. And then once we have a couple of points on the board, some small wins, then we can start ink blotting that to the bigger and more complex problems, rather than trying to chew off autonomy in a comms contested, DDIL environment, right as the first one out of the gates. So that would be my advice. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Colonel. Good advice. Dr. Rainey, what one big thing would you like from industry?
So along those same lines of starting small and growing bigger, I would request bounds on performance and explaining if you have some system, when does it work, how well does it work, but also when does it fail, and what's the what type of data is it designed for, and where are you going to push it over the edge, and where should we, turn it off and try something else? So performance bounds.
Okay, thanks for that. Sam?
Yeah, I've already given you my two, but again, the reason that I'm emphasizing on the high end is my view as a strategist looking at technology, and what they've talked about we can do, and we're looking forward to it. I'm talking about what some people have promised, and at this point we can't do. So those who want to operationalize AI should look at those deception and self-control when humans cannot control it.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So now that you've heard from our panelists, we wanted to open up the floor to you. If you have a question, please step up to a mic, identify yourself and your organization, and ask whatever question you have. You can address the question to a single panelist or to the panel in general, in which case we'll figure out who's best equipped to answer it. And as a courtesy to others asking questions, please just ask a one-part question, and I'm sure our panelists would much prefer answering questions than listening to manifestos. So with that as an open invitation, who's got the first question?
Hi,
Yes,
Tony
sir.
Davis from IBM. So we've got a few years of experience with AI, and we've got a lot of scar tissue. So is there a lot of knowledge sharing happening in the defense space as far as, mini pilots that are happening? Are you guys talking to each other to share what's working, what's not? Because I don't know if that's happening. In the industry side, we do share a lot, and that's how we're learning and iterating a lot quicker so we can get some successes. Can you illuminate a little bit on where your lessons learned are happening as you go through the AI journey?
Great question. I'll ask Dr. Rainey to start about NAML, and then Colonel Pugh with his AI machine learning community of the willing. So, Katie?
So we're definitely not doing as well as we could be doing, but that is one of the goals behind NAML, and there's a number of other similar types of events where we try to get together both NAML is very broad and it's open to anyone, but then we also try to have more restricted things where we can talk in closed settings, because that's a real challenge. I mean, not just in AI, but for defense applications, you can't trying to share with people. Trying to do any sort of restricted work in a COVID environment is challenging enough, and then getting all that. But anyway, that it is a really important thing to be doing, and I think that we should be encouraging. We do at NIWC PAC, we encourage our researchers to publish to the greatest extent possible, even if it's just part of the work that you're doing, to try to get that engagement with anyone that you can and sharing those best practices.
Colonel Pugh?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, and it goes back to if we only knew what we know kind of thing. So I accidentally went on the SBIR website, which is on the internet, and you can type in any term, and you get back the thousands and thousands of SBIRs that are funded that nobody has any idea what those things are doing, that is working in their own silo most of the time. And so this idea of clustering all of this activity that takes place in academia, in the research labs, at the Naval Postgraduate School, or commercial sector, or out in the fleet, people are doing really interesting things or have interesting ideas, and clustering that together. So the AI Coalition of the Willing, the COW, is one way to do that. The other way is advertising, having a less transactional, non-FAR-based relationship with industry. And so whether doing that through CRADAs, through cooperative research and development agreements, or internships, so sending somebody from NIWC PAC or a faculty member at MPS or an officer or staff NCO from the Naval Postgraduate School to sit in your labs and understand what you're struggling with and where you're seeing successes. Keeping it all in NDA, not to ruin competitive advantage because that's to the government's benefit, but also gaining insight and exposure and igniting the imagination, and educating people at the same time, I think is what we have to do. And I think we're doing some of that. I think NAML's a great example. I think the COW is a pretty good example, but we cannot communicate enough, and it all boils down to trust. And a lot of that is on the government to not ruin your competitive advantage, but also help you, develop whatever it is that you're developing so that it is exactly what we want, with the end result that we're skating to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is. So not looking to go to Best Buy and just purchase what you've developed, but co-develop it in the lab with you, so that we can share insights all the way along, iteratively. Thanks.
Thank you. Over on our left, yes, sir.
Hi there. My name is Mark Walker. I'm with a small business called D2K Technologies. We're AI orchestration system developer and autonomous operations. Actually, I became a practitioner after first being an enlisted naval nuclear reactor operator. So, yeah, we can take the fleet and we can train them to do amazing things. My question is, so if you were going to try to make a decision without AI, you'd probably rely on a lot of inputs from a lot of smart people. Have you, as part of your research, looked at operationalizing AI by employing multiple intelligent agents that give you advice, and then you apply another level of software to decide what to do with that advice?
So I'll ask Dr. Rainey to take that on. At our lab, we're the Navy's command and control lab, so we don't work off an operational requirement. We try to imagine what the C4ISR system of the future is going to look like. So we have actually a movie called Conflict 2037, and it envisions having a narrow AI, but pretty close to general AI assistant called Kennedy, which integrates with the staff to do exactly what you're suggesting. Takes in sensor inputs, and then sometimes without being asked, gives advice to the carrier strike group commander. So I think that's what you're getting at. I think that's what a lot of us are working towards, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Rainey to give any more specifics on that idea.
Thanks. In that video, it's actually the humans that make the decision, but given kind of the inputs and the consequences of those options that are given by the AI. There's I don't know how familiar you are with computer vision work, but there's a similar concept called boosting, where you take multiple different classifiers and then combine them together that make multiple weak classifiers and put them together, and they give a stronger opinion. So I don't work specifically in the area that you're discussing, so I can't really speak more intelligently on that. But I think that, like I said before, having parameters or a clear understanding of how well your one system works, how well your one algorithm works, now that allows you to, once you can evaluate it, now you can combine them and take the strengths of those multiple things. So that's another place where that is, where evaluation of your systems is really crucial. Thank you.
If it's okay, I'd like to pile onto that. Did I hear you say you worked in the Navy's nuclear power program? So if you recall, the USS Nautilus was launched in 1954. That was only 9 years after we dropped nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there was not a national consensus that this was a good thing. So the Navy had to prove to Congress and the American public that they would first do no harm. And I think that's the other thing that those of us in the military and industry and the lab community and academia need to show, that inserting AI into these systems will not do any harm, that we're not going to have a weapon, we're not going to have a HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that's sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, that's a very tough argument. So as we're marching along with all these great ideas, I think the onus is going to be on us to say, no, this will not do any harm. We do have a human in the loop, so if that helps. So, yes, sir.
Hello, Peter Van Inventor. So my question is...
I'm not sure your mic is on, Peter.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Good.
Just a little time. So, given the example you gave earlier of ship detection, classification, and difficulty getting 100% precision and recall, do you think that our adversaries share the same kind of risk type of profile that they won't use? I mean, they'll require a human in the loop to use the machine learning algorithms, and they'll want near 100%, or do you think they might accept maybe 90% and not have a human in the loop? And what do you see as the consequence of that in the next conflict?
Sam, I think you've done the most work in this area, and then Colonel Pugh, over to you.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a very good question. George and I have discussed that on, at what point can't you have humans in the loop? First of all, to answer your first question, do our potential opponents view it the same way as we do? No, they don't. Right now, we're not planning on invading Mexico. Unlike, although Mexico sits next to us like the Ukraine sits to Russia, we're not planning on invading it. Our opponents think differently than us because they are different types of regimes. They have different objectives. And I believe, I took a look at foreign applications of military AI, and what I found is in the Chinese situation, they're focusing on military AI to be able to have control from the uppermost levels on tactical operations and pretty much cut out the middle deciders. Why? Because they fear its regime. Their number one is preserving the regime. They fear the middle leadership, what they might do. So that's their focus on AI. They want to build a system whereas they are getting the information from the tactical level to the senior-most level down to tactical level. In the case of Russia, Russia has a severe manpower problem. So they're looking at AI and autonomous systems to replace their manpower problem. And that's why they've already worked on autonomous tanks, autonomous weapon systems, because they don't have the manpower to man those systems if they're going to go up against a major opponent like us. So both of these regimes look at AI for different purposes, and they're going to use them for different purposes. Now, how does that affect us? That's the great question to consider. If the opponent is going all autonomous, do we have to? I don't know. That's what we're wrestling with.
Do you want to jump in, or you want me to?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So
Yep.
it's a great question, and I like it. So as a Marine, I think about the chosen reservoir. Like, do they have the same value of life like all other countries as we do? And certainly, that is not the case. Or Afghanistan and Iraq. The last 20 years. What happens when you fight somebody who doesn't have the same moral or ethical concerns for the law of war or something like that? What I would tell you is, from Randy's perspective, is one, the alternative is unacceptable. Man in the loop, man on the loop, or totally autonomous. Totally autonomous is not, I think, an acceptable answer. But that's a good thing. That's to our advantage, because when you look at, the AI chess master versus the human chess master, the AI always wins, but when you put the AI with the human, they always beat the computer and they beat the human. And so, having the human in the loop or on the loop is actually an advantage, not a disadvantage. And I think, perceived in this OODA loop thing, and if I can just take the human out of it, it makes it faster. It makes it faster, but it makes it fragile. And so I hope nobody thinks that we should be building totally autonomous systems, except to do the dull and dangerous things that don't require human intervention. So thanks for your question.
No, and I want to thank you again, and not doing this to make you blush, but it's probably the most important question we always get. So when people think of AI in military weapon systems, they seem to always be thinking of the missile we're going to shoot downrange to hit city X on the other side of the Pacific. But I listened to our DOD and Navy leadership. Our Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Hicks, said the most important use of AI is to help leaders make decisions under stress. The leader of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Lieutenant General Groen, who's Marine, said the most important thing AI is going to do is to get inside the enemy's OODA loop. Our Chief of Naval Operations says the same thing, and our Commandant of the Marine Corps says the same thing. So all the leadership is saying, of all the great things AI and machine learning can do for the military, it's to help our military leaders outthink the adversary. So again, for industry, if you're thinking what can AI do for the military, the human bandwidth is the biggest constraint on the battlefield right now. So that's where we need the most help, and that's, to the Colonel's point, not going to be either or. It's going to be the human-machine interface in fighting the war. But thanks for that question. Yes, ma'am, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kays. I work for the Marine Corps Tactical Systems Support Activity up at Camp Pendleton. And my question has to do, it's really weird hearing myself, sorry. My question has to do with the requirements for implementing AI in our systems and whether you see that as coming from the bottom up, AI practitioners coming to systems and finding humans that are willing to trust and learn and try these methods in order to advance these systems, or is it going to be requirements from the top down that are going to force systems to have to implement AI?
So I'll start, and then the other panelists can jump in if that's okay. So I think it's got to come from the outside and from the bottom up, because when you're on active duty, you're trained not to complain about your equipment. You overcome and adapt, and if the display only shows you so much and you want more, you don't even know who to ask. So I think coming forward, researchers like Dr. Rainey coming forward and saying, hey, we can help solve your problem if you let us do this. And again, not to be the director of corporate comms for our lab, which I'm not, we have an entire branch, it's called Human Systems Integration, where we build a prototype, we take it to the fleet of the Fleet Marine Forces, and we say, what do you think? And sometimes they go, that's of no use to us, thanks anyway, and pat us on the head and we go home. But sometimes they say, well, if it did this other thing too, that would be better. So I think it comes from the outside, but I'll defer to the rest of the panel to have a thought.
So I'd say it's a combination of everything. If you have, the guys on the ground saying, oh, I wish I had a robot that could make this decision, and then the scientists say, sorry, that's possible. Or if the scientists come and say, hey, we made you this widget, do you want to use it? And they say, no, we're just going to turn it off. You're talking past each other, and there has to be a give and take, and then there also has to be sort of the higher level requirements coming down. Like, where do we see, we don't want to solve next week's problems. We want to solve the problems that we're going to be facing in 5, 10, 30 years. So I think it's a combination of all those things, and it's a communication issue as well.
Can I add, George, just to something that Kate has said, and this is, again, advice to those in the industry. It comes from Admiral Scott Swift, who was a former commander of Pacific Fleet. He said, when you bring me a widget, before you bring me a widget, explain to me my operational environment. And if you can't explain what my operational environment is, or what my challenges are, or what my requirements are, I don't want to see your widget. So in this dialogue between push and pull, there has to be a constant discussion, kind of what I do, on what the operational environment is that the tool is going to be used in. So always include that when you're thinking about how you're going to present this good idea to Department of Defense.
Can I just to add to that, both excellent points. Certainly, the utility of anything has to be taken in the context of the operating environment and the adversary. So that is great advice. And then the bottom up, top down is both both legitimate. What I would say is it has to be highly iterative and highly participative too. So I'm a big fan of DevSecOps, and this idea that it is the operator and the developer sitting right next to each other, and the operator saying, hey, can you make it do this? And the developer says like this, and the operator says no, close, but this other thing. And so I think whether it's top down or bottom up, it has to be side by side, the operator and the developer, algorithm developer in this case, or data tagger or whatever, have to be sitting next to each other so that you never lose the context as you're going through this process.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Great questions.
Hi, thank you all panelists for your time. And my name is Zach Chang. I'm co-founder of Navancio, specialize in modernization and enhancement. You guys talked about, I think, Dr. Rainey, you said it best in terms of the importance of data when it comes to artificial intelligence. And really, I mean, that's what drives the whole thing. And also, Captain Tangredi, you mentioned about the issue of, how can we have a machine that knows when to not to trust itself. I think so. Tying those two pieces together, I think, comes back to the data, right? And how do you verify those data sources in real time? So my question is what technologies and approaches are you guys researching and considering when it comes to verifying the data sources that are going into these AI models?
Katie, you want to start that one?
So we're looking at ways that you can characterize sort of the envelope of data that your system will work on. So we had one example, we were developing an app that could recognize different types of mines for the EOD folks. And they collected some data out at Indian Head in Virginia in lots of different environments. And then they made the app and the folks at NIWC were testing it at Camp Pendleton, and it wasn't working because the grassy data in Virginia was green and the grass in Camp Pendleton was brown. And, those backgrounds really tripped it up. So, going back to what I said before about evaluating your systems, if you don't know what's going to break it, then you don't know anything. You don't know how it's going to work out in the operational environment. And to Randy's point, considering that operational environment, you don't have the real world data. You don't have the data that you're going to use at the time that you're training and developing. I don't think that the field, the folks at NIWC were working on it, there's folks in academia working on it, there's folks in industry working on it, but really I don't think that the field has fully advanced to developing those methods and metrics to understand the performance of algorithms, and I think that that's something that we need to be focusing on more.
Yeah, to answer your question, my message, again, from my thing is to tell the DoD leadership it's going to take more time and cost you more money to be able to solve this challenge than you think.
Virtual versions of things and video games to generate synthetic data, because you know that like whatever it is that you're modeling and you're like that is going to be good data that you can trust, and then use that to prove out, to be that first iteration in training your neural network or whatever, and then get real data and compare it against the clean data. You know it's pristine that came out of your synthetic data. So just having seen some with computer vision. So a digital snapshot of a video game, to the AI algorithm looks exactly the same as a digital photograph. Right. So that to me is a compelling way to get good data.
So we're bumping up close to the end of our panel. So for the two gentlemen standing, if you could just maybe ask one question of one panelist, and then we'll wrap it up that way. Yes, sir.
Hi, Bob Shagno with Calypso AI, and maybe Dr. Rainey might be able to address this. The Jake just released a BPA on testing and training models. In terms of operationalizing AI models, what would be your positive outcome from that contract?
I think I'm really glad that the Jake is focusing on this. I think that having standard procedures along the lines that the DoD has for doing V&V, T&E on all other types of systems. There are different considerations for AI, like when you need to retrain, now you've got a completely different model. There's lots of things that are a bit different, but having those standard processes that anyone can use, I think that would be a really good outcome from what the Jake's doing.
Okay, sir, you have the honor of the last question. This is going to be the best one all day.
I hope so. So Jean-Pierre Lutz, IBM, also a retired nuke and naval intel officer. My question is why haven't we operationalized some AI? Because we talked about commercially available artificial intelligence. I invite you over to the booth. I can show you we're processing 4 million documents a year for the VA, operationalizing AI. So we're doing it. We're doing a job that needs to be done where it used to take 4.5 months for somebody to get a claim made. We can do it in a day, like literally process through. We can apply AI, all of us out here in this area, apply AI to automation and get people's 20-80 rule or 80-20 rule down and flip it around where we can have a 20 and then 80% using my brain to do the job. I've been into officers, so I know it's really, really hard to say I'm going to trust the machine to find something that I couldn't find. But if I could have that machine pull up a map for me ahead of when I need it, it's going to save my time to actually get the job done. So why haven't we operationalized an AI?
So, as a moderator, I'll start off and be the stucky to answer your question. I think I want to just go back to what Colonel Pugh said earlier. A lot of senior officials who I hear talking about AI talk in very lofty terms that AI is going to do these wonderful things for, magnificent high-end things. And I think what Colonel Pugh's suggesting, and I believe, is get a small win. And then someone else will say, well, that organization just did that. Why isn't mine? But you want to keep going, sir?
Yeah. Let's see, how many did I write down? Just a couple. So one is the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, holding us back. Two is there's no Hyman Rickover, because you're a nuke. There's no Hyman Rickover for AI that just gives the middle finger to the system and is like, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. And all of the people are going to complain, because we're stealing people's budgets and we're doing things, and there's risk involved, and we don't have that yet. So maybe General Gruen will be, I hope, our Hyman Rickover for AI. And then I think that the last piece is attention deficit disorder or whatever. That because we have personality-based leadership a lot, and we have people that rotate jobs 2 years at a time, kind of that we don't have the attention span. It goes back to Rickover, maybe. I'm a Rickover. And hey, I'm going to leave you in that job for 10 years or 15 years, and you keep us progressively moving forward. So that's just 3, but I have more if you want to hang around later.
I just want to add to that, it's not just the nuke world. The Aegis had Wayne Meyer, and he ran that for years between different billets and was the champion. What you need to have is that champion. Otherwise, the budget's going to be sliced in ways that it's going to go various pieces. So the champion's always necessary.
Well, if Sandra's standing up here, I think we're out of time. Thank you all for participating, and please join me in thanking our panel.
I'm hanging around if people want to after the ceremony.
Terrific. Yep, thanks for that.